Fatal friendship. When best friends become deadly enemies. Criminal story. Emma and Laura had been best friends for as long as they could remember. From their early childhood days spent playing in the park to late-night talks about boys, dreams, and future ambitions, they had been inseparable. The world outside their friendship may have changed with time. Different schools, different boyfriends, different jobs, but the bond they shared had always been constant. They knew each other's fears, their deepest desires, their faults and secrets. Through every trial and triumph, they had always been there for each other. Or at least that was what Emma had believed. Before we can continue, if you love crime stories, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Emma often thought back to the days of their youth, those seemingly carefree years when the weight of the world had not yet settled on their shoulders. Laura had always been the more outgoing of the two. She was the one who excelled in everything she tried, whether it was academics, athletics, or social circles. Emma had never minded that Laura shone so brightly, though. They had their own rhythm, their own place within their friendship. Laura was the star, but Emma was the steady, grounding force. They complemented each other, and that was enough. Emma felt content in the role she played. It wasn't until later in life, as the years wore on and their paths began to diverge, that Emma started to feel the weight of her position in the friendship more acutely. Their 20s had brought a sense of competition between them that neither could quite explain. Laura had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She had a job at a prestigious marketing firm, a solid relationship with her boyfriend, and a circle of friends who adored her. She was confident, ambitious, and constantly climbing higher. Emma, on the other hand, had found herself in a more stagnant place. While Laura's career was soaring, Emma was stuck in a mid-level position in an office job she had never truly enjoyed. She had always been capable, but she lacked the drive or the courage to reach for more. As they sat together on Friday nights, just the two of them, as they had since their teenage years, Emma began to feel the creeping sensation that she was being left behind. Laura would tell her about her latest promotion or how her boss had praised her at work, while Emma struggled to maintain a neutral smile. The envy Emma had long suppressed began to take root, quietly at first. She didn't want to resent Laura. She wanted to be happy for her, to share in her joy. But it was hard when it seemed like Laura was living a life Emma had always dreamed of, but never managed to attain. On these nights, they would sit in a dimly lit restaurant or one of their favorite bars, and the hours would slip by in easy conversation. Emma would ask Laura about her career, her relationships, and all the details of her life. But in truth, every time Laura mentioned another success, Emma felt the knot of inadequacy tighten in her chest. She would nod along, feigning interest, but in the back of her mind, the thought would linger. Why not me? Why does Laura get everything she wants while I get left behind? But Emma couldn't say it out loud. To admit these feelings of envy would have been to tear down the very foundation of their friendship. Laura was her best friend, after all. Emma was supposed to be happy for her. So instead of confronting these emotions, Emma buried them, convincing herself that she was simply being irrational. She loved Laura, didn't she? She wanted to see her succeed. But deep down, a seed of resentment had taken root, and like any seed, it began to grow. It wasn't just about the promotions or the recognition that Laura seemed to get so easily. There was something about the way Laura moved through life, so effortlessly, so certain, that grated against Emma's own sense of self. Emma had always been a quieter person, someone who was more comfortable supporting others than standing in the spotlight. Yet, as the years passed, Emma realized that she wanted more. She wanted to feel the rush of success, to feel important, to be seen in the way Laura was seen. She wanted the admiration. She wanted the power. She wanted the respect that came with it. Laura, for all her confidence, seemed to have no idea of the storm brewing in Emma's mind. She was oblivious to the quiet tension that was building between them. If she ever sensed it, she chose not to acknowledge it. After all, why would she? She was still Emma's best friend. They still shared the same inside jokes, the same comfortable silences, the same memories. And Laura was genuinely happy for Emma, too. She would encourage Emma to pursue her dreams, to ask for the promotion she so desperately wanted. "You've got so much potential," Laura would say, her smile bright. "You just need to ask for it. You deserve it." But Laura's encouragement only seemed to magnify Emma's feelings of inadequacy. It was almost as if Laura didn't understand just how much Emma wanted what she had. Emma had heard the advice before. Just ask for what you want. But the truth was, Emma had never been the type to push for anything. She had always waited for things to come to her. But when they didn't, when they never did, it left her feeling bitter, as though the universe had simply forgotten about her. The frustration mounted with every day that passed. Then, one day, Emma found herself in the middle of a conversation that would change everything. Laura called her one afternoon, practically giddy with excitement. "Guess what?" she said. "I got the promotion. They finally offered it to me." Laura's voice was practically vibrating with happiness. "I'm going to be managing the whole department, Em. Can you believe it?" Emma felt a strange mixture of pride for her friend and a deep, gnawing jealousy that twisted in her stomach. She had wanted that promotion. She had wanted it. Emma had been working at the same company for years, and yet it was Laura, who had only joined the company a few years prior, who had earned it. The feelings she had buried for so long erupted all at once. For a moment, she felt as if she were drowning. How could Laura, who had always had everything handed to her on a silver platter, be so blind to the fact that Emma had been working for this very thing, struggling to climb that same corporate ladder? Emma congratulated Laura with the same fake enthusiasm she always mustered. "That's amazing, Laura. I'm so proud of you." But inside, something had cracked. The seeds of resentment that had slowly been taking root in Emma's heart were now beginning to sprout. Over the next few days, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken between them. She found herself replaying the conversation over and over in her mind, analyzing every word, every inflection of Laura's voice. The jealousy, which she had tried so hard to suppress, was no longer a quiet murmur in the back of her mind. It had become a loud, insistent voice demanding attention. And when Emma looked at Laura now, it wasn't with the admiration she had once felt. It was with a quiet, simmering resentment. Emma couldn't help but wonder, why was Laura always the one who succeeded? What did Laura have that Emma didn't? And most importantly, why did Emma always feel like she was in Laura's shadow, constantly striving to catch up but never quite reaching her? It wasn't long before Emma's thoughts took a darker turn. If she couldn't beat Laura in the race for success, perhaps she could at least level the playing field. She began to watch Laura more closely, looking for any weakness, any vulnerability she could exploit. It wasn't enough that Laura had everything Emma wanted. Now, Emma wanted to take it from her. Laura's affair, something Emma would discover by sheer accident, would provide the perfect opportunity. But at this moment, Emma hadn't yet realized just how far she was willing to go. She only knew that the growing envy she felt was becoming more consuming, more urgent. And the friendship that had once been the most important thing in her life was now a mere shell, something she would soon tear apart to get what she wanted. The seed of jealousy that had taken root within Emma had begun to sprout, and it was growing into something much darker than she had ever anticipated. Laura's promotion was the final catalyst, but the emotional weight of it had been building for months, even years. What had started as a quiet longing to achieve more had slowly twisted into something far more dangerous. Emma had always believed that she was content with her life. She had spent so many years trying to convince herself that she was fine with being in the background, being the support, being the one who cheered for others rather than demanding the spotlight for herself. It was a role she had played for so long that it had become part of her identity. But as time went on, Emma realized that the quiet satisfaction she once felt had turned into an undercurrent of frustration. And the more she saw Laura soar, the more Emma began to question the choices she had made. Why wasn't she the one receiving the accolades? Why hadn't she been recognized for her hard work? But it wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about the sense of powerlessness that had begun to gnaw at Emma's core. The way Laura moved through life so effortlessly, she had the career, the boyfriend, the friends, while Emma felt like she was stuck, constantly treading water. She told herself that it was okay, that she didn't need the fame or the recognition, that what really mattered was being a good person, being there for her friends, and being content with the life she had built. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She wanted more. Emma had long ago stopped telling herself that she was happy with her life. The quiet discontentment was always there, bubbling beneath the surface, and every time Laura shared her latest achievement, Emma felt it resurface with a vengeance. The gnawing feeling that she had been overlooked, that her accomplishments, if you could call them that, had been forgotten, turned into a bitter resentment that clouded her every thought. She couldn't even remember the last time she had celebrated something for herself. It felt as though Laura's success had stolen the joy out of Emma's own life, leaving a hollow void where her ambition had once been. When Emma received Laura's phone call announcing the promotion, she had been happy for her, at least outwardly. She had smiled and congratulated Laura with the kind of enthusiasm she knew would be expected of her. But internally, Emma had been seething. She hadn't even been considered for the promotion. How could she have been? She wasn't as charismatic as Laura. She wasn't as confident, and frankly, she hadn't pushed herself the way Laura had. And yet, here was Laura, receiving all the recognition and success Emma had dreamed of but never quite attained. The resentment had taken root, and Emma couldn't shake it off. Every time she saw Laura, she couldn't help but compare her life to her friends. It felt unfair, like some cosmic mistake. Laura had it all, everything Emma had wanted. Laura was the one who had fought for what she wanted and won, while Emma had always been too passive, too unsure of herself. But what if things had been different? What if Emma had been the one to push for a promotion? What if she had demanded to be noticed? What if she had taken what she wanted instead of waiting for it to come to her? These thoughts began to consume Emma. She couldn't shake the idea that Laura had something she didn't deserve. What had Laura done to earn it, other than simply being herself? And if Emma could somehow get Laura out of the way, she could finally take that coveted position for herself. The idea was tempting, and the more Emma thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to achieve the recognition she craved. But there was a moral dilemma lurking in the back of her mind. Emma knew she was crossing a line. She had always prided herself on her integrity, on the fact that she had never resorted to underhanded tactics to get ahead. But in that moment, she found herself wondering whether she was justifying something far worse. But the internal struggle didn't last long. Emma's mind, sharp and calculating, quickly realized that she wasn't asking for much. She wasn't trying to sabotage Laura entirely. No, Emma told herself she just wanted a little piece of what Laura had. She wasn't going to destroy Laura's life. She would just make sure Laura knew who had the power. If Laura had made a mistake, if she had something to hide, it could be the perfect leverage, the perfect opportunity to tilt the scales in Emma's favor. And then, by pure coincidence, Emma discovered Laura's affair. It wasn't intentional, not at first. Emma had simply been glancing at Laura's phone while they were having a drink one night. Laura had been distracted, her attention diverted by a conversation with someone at another table. Emma, her mind already clouded by thoughts of the promotion and her own perceived inadequacies, picked up the phone. She didn't expect to find anything incriminating, but when she saw the text messages between Laura and a man whose name she didn't recognize, her heart skipped a beat. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, and unmistakably romantic. The details were sparse, but it was clear that Laura was engaged in something she didn't want anyone to know about. At first, Emma didn't know how to process the information. Part of her wanted to confront Laura right then and there, to accuse her of betrayal. But no, Emma knew that wouldn't be the right move. Confronting Laura would mean risking everything, and Emma was too calculating for that. This could be her key, her leverage. If Laura had an affair, something she was clearly trying to hide, Emma could use it against her. The power dynamic would shift. No longer would Emma be the overlooked, the passive one. She would have the upper hand. The more Emma thought about it, the more the idea took hold. The affair wasn't just an opportunity, it was the key to everything she had ever wanted. Laura's perfect life was built on lies. She wasn't untouchable. Emma could make her bend to her will. If she exposed Laura's secret, she would have the power to force Laura to give up the promotion, to step aside. It was the perfect plan, a way for Emma to claim the success she had long been denied without ever having to fight for it. At first, Emma felt guilty. This wasn't like her. She had always tried to be the kind of person who lifted others up, not tore them down. But the more she thought about it, the more she convinced herself that this was simply a chance to right the wrongs in her own life. She wasn't destroying Laura. She was simply leveling the playing field. If Laura had the power to manipulate people, to hide her secrets behind a well-crafted facade, then Emma had the right to expose them. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was simply taking back what was rightfully hers. The idea of leveraging Laura's affair consumed Emma. It was the perfect solution, a way to take control without having to put in the hard work or take the risks. She would threaten to expose Laura's secret unless she agreed to step down from the promotion. The thought of it gave Emma a rush of excitement, a sense of power she had never known before. She imagined Laura's panic when she realized she was caught. The thought of Laura, once the untouchable star, reduced to a crumbling, helpless figure in the face of Emma's control, thrilled her. But even as Emma began to plan, a small voice in the back of her mind told her that this was dangerous. It told her that she was treading on dangerous ground. She was already starting to manipulate Laura, to bend her to her will. What would stop her from going even further? Emma had never considered herself a malicious person, but she found herself wondering how much she could push before the situation got out of control. Still, the temptation was too strong. The desire to have what Laura had, to take her place, became an obsession that Emma couldn't shake. She needed to act. She needed to make sure she wasn't left behind anymore. Emma was about to cross a line she could never come back from. For years, Emma had told herself that she was happy being in the background. She had always been content to play the supporting role in her friendship with Laura, content to watch her friend shine while Emma herself found satisfaction in quieter achievements. But as time went on, something within her began to shift, slowly at first, like a crack in the foundation of a house that had once seemed so sturdy. And that crack grew, widening with every success Laura had. What had once been an innocent, supportive friendship was now laced with something much more insidious: envy. It wasn't that Emma disliked Laura, not at all. Laura was still, in many ways, the same person she had always been: fun-loving, confident, beautiful, effortlessly excelling at everything she touched. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and light it up without even trying. Emma had always admired her for that, admired Laura's ability to command attention without seeming to care about it. And for years, Emma had taken pride in being the quiet, steady companion to Laura's fiery brilliance. But lately, something had started to feel different. Something had begun to gnaw at Emma, tugging at the seams of their friendship. At first, it was just a passing thought, a fleeting moment of comparison. But then it happened again, and again. Every time Emma looked at Laura, she saw not just her friend's successes, but her own quiet failure to break through the glass ceiling she had been staring at for years. They had always been on different tracks. Laura was the one who had always been ahead, the one whose natural charisma had guided her effortlessly through life. Laura had a powerful job, an even more powerful boyfriend, a tight-knit group of friends who adored her. She was the one who got the promotion, the applause, the acknowledgement. And Emma, well, Emma had simply been forgotten. The first crack in the dam appeared when Emma's company announced an open managerial position. It was a role Emma had been eyeing for months, one she had worked hard to qualify for. She had believed, naively perhaps, that it was just a matter of time before she would be considered for the position. She had earned it. Her boss had told her, in private conversations, that she had what it took. But when the announcement came, it wasn't Emma's name that was called. It was Laura's. At first, Emma thought it was a mistake. It had to be. Laura had only joined the company a few years ago, and while she was talented, she had never been there as long as Emma had. How could Laura, who had only recently been promoted, be the one to take the top job? The injustice of it seared through Emma like a hot blade. But as the days wore on, Emma realized that this wasn't a mistake. It was a fact. Laura had been chosen. Emma had been overlooked. It wasn't just the promotion that hurt. It was everything. The way Laura carried herself with such effortless grace, the way she seemed to have everything she wanted without ever having to fight for it. Emma watched as Laura's career skyrocketed, as she was invited to exclusive events, as she was showered with praise. Laura, who had always been so unapologetically ambitious, had everything Emma had ever dreamed of. The title, the recognition, the success. It didn't feel fair. And that's when the seed of jealousy began to take root. At first, Emma had tried to suppress it, tried to tell herself that it wasn't that important. Laura was her friend. She should be happy for her. She should feel proud. But Emma couldn't ignore the growing resentment that began to fester inside her. Laura had what Emma wanted, what she needed, and Emma wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that she was okay with being left behind. Emma started to notice little things, too. The way Laura talked about her job, her relationship, her life, always with that air of effortless success. It was as if Laura didn't even have to try, as if the universe simply handed her everything she wanted on a silver platter. Emma had worked so hard for everything she had achieved, but it never seemed to be enough. No matter how many late nights she worked, no matter how many sacrifices she made, it felt like the world had just forgotten about her. And that's when it all started to unravel in Emma's mind. The quiet, passive frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long suddenly came to the forefront. She was tired of being the one who was overlooked, tired of being the one who was always second best. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about the life that Laura had, a life that Emma had always dreamed of, but could never quite reach. Emma began to ask herself questions that she had never dared to before. Why couldn't I have that too? Why is she always the one who gets everything? It wasn't just envy, it was a sense of entitlement. Emma had done everything right, followed all the rules, played the part of the loyal friend and the dedicated worker. And yet, there she was, stuck in a dead-end job, while Laura sailed past her with ease. What had Laura done that Emma hadn't? Why should she have everything while Emma was left with nothing? That's when Emma's thoughts began to take a darker turn. She was no longer willing to simply accept her place in the world. If life wasn't going to give her what she wanted, then perhaps she needed to take it. And then, by chance, Emma stumbled upon the information that would change everything. It happened during a late-night girls' night in, when Laura had been drinking more than usual. They were sitting together, the two of them alone, laughing and talking as they had so many times before. Laura was a little tipsy and Emma, already on edge with all of her inner turmoil, was unusually observant. It was then that Emma noticed Laura's phone on the table. Laura had carelessly left it unlocked, and for a moment, Emma hesitated. She knew it was wrong to snoop, but something inside her urged her to take a look. The temptation was too great. She didn't know what she was looking for, but when she saw the series of text messages between Laura and a man whose name she didn't recognize, a surge of excitement and dread filled Emma's chest. The messages were intimate, flirtatious. Clearly, an affair was underway. The realization hit Emma like a lightning bolt. Laura, her best friend, the one who had everything, the one who was always the perfect one, had a secret. She had something to hide. Laura wasn't perfect after all. She was just like everyone else, flawed and vulnerable. For a moment, Emma's first instinct was to confront Laura, to demand answers. But then the reality of what she had found began to sink in. This wasn't just some trivial detail. This was leverage. This was power. In that moment, Emma's desire to have what Laura had suddenly took on a new form. She could use this information to her advantage. She could make Laura pay for everything, the promotion, the attention, the success. The temptation was overwhelming. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. She could threaten to expose the affair unless Laura agreed to step down from the promotion. It wasn't just about taking the position, it was about taking back control, about ensuring that she wasn't always the one left behind. She wasn't going to destroy Laura's life, Emma reassured herself. She was just going to make sure Laura understood who was in charge. Emma's heart beat faster as she thought about how easily she could manipulate Laura. She had always been the one who held the power in their friendship, hadn't she? She had always been the one who had to be there for Laura, the one who kept the friendship grounded. But now she realized the tables could be turned. The power was hers. She could take what she deserved, finally, and Laura would have no choice but to step aside. The guilt that had briefly crossed Emma's mind now seemed distant. She wasn't doing anything wrong, she told herself. She was simply leveling the playing field. Laura had everything handed to her, and now Emma was going to take a piece of it for herself. She was going to make sure that, at the very least, she wasn't left behind anymore. The plan was set. Emma couldn't wait to put it into motion. It was one of those cold, quiet evenings in early spring when everything seemed to be in flux. The air was heavy with anticipation, and for Emma, the feeling of impending change clung to her like a second skin. She had made her decision. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The plan had taken shape in her mind quickly after she discovered the affair, perhaps too quickly. Emma had always been good at identifying opportunities, at recognizing when a situation could be leveraged. In her mind, this was just another opportunity. Laura had been careless, vulnerable, and now Emma had the upper hand. The power was hers. She could take what she had been denied for so long, the promotion, the success, the recognition. She could finally prove to everyone, including herself, that she was more than just the quiet, overlooked one. But even as Emma plotted, the gnawing feeling of guilt had not fully subsided. She told herself that she wasn't being malicious. She wasn't trying to ruin Laura's life. She wasn't even trying to destroy her career. No, Emma told herself, she was simply doing what needed to be done. She had earned that promotion after all. She had worked for it, and if Laura had gotten it by way of luck, charm, or an affair, then that was something Emma could fix. The plan itself was simple. She would confront Laura with what she knew, her affair, and use it as leverage to force her to relinquish the promotion. Emma had thought about every detail carefully. She knew Laura would never voluntarily step down from a job she had worked so hard to get. But if Emma could make Laura feel cornered enough, expose her secret at the right time, then perhaps Laura would see that her only option was to step aside. And then, Emma would step into the void left behind. The promotion would be hers. She would finally have the life she had been denied for so long. The first step was getting Laura alone. Emma knew it wouldn't be easy to have a candid conversation with Laura while the rest of their friends were around, especially with everything that had happened between them recently. They hadn't been spending as much time together lately. The distance between them had grown, and Emma could sense that Laura, though outwardly friendly, was starting to pick up on something off in their dynamic. But Emma had no choice. She needed to get Laura alone. And she needed to do it soon. It was a Friday night when Emma finally called Laura, asking if they could meet up. She made it sound casual, almost nonchalant, as if she were simply checking in to see how Laura was doing. But in the back of her mind, Emma was already planning the confrontation. She had rehearsed the words in her head over and over again, practicing how she would present the information. She had to appear calm, collected, no signs of anger, no sign of malice. Laura would never believe her if she didn't keep her cool. If Emma were too emotional, too vindictive, Laura would shut her down immediately. The meeting took place at a small, intimate cafe where the two of them had spent so many afternoons, catching up over coffee, laughing about old memories, and talking about the future. It was familiar, comfortable, a place where Emma had once felt like they were equals. Now it felt like a battlefield. And she, the predator, had carefully orchestrated the perfect trap. Laura arrived a little late, but that was typical for her. She always had somewhere to be, someone to talk to. Her life was always moving, always full of people, always full of excitement. Emma was different, quieter, more reserved, but she was here now, sitting in the same cafe with Laura, prepared to expose the secret that would change everything. When Laura sat down, she smiled at Emma, unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. They exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. Nothing deep, just the usual friendly banter. Emma could sense Laura's unease, though. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just that Laura was busy or distracted. It was more as though she was aware of the distance that had grown between them. Still, Laura didn't know what Emma knew. Not yet. "So, how's everything going?" Laura asked, stirring her coffee absently, her tone light and casual. "Good," Emma replied, her voice steady, almost too steady. "Busy, but you know, that's life." For a moment, the conversation drifted to work, their usual territory. Laura gushed about her new role, about how she was settling into the position. She mentioned a few upcoming projects she was excited about, her face glowing with a kind of confidence that Emma had once admired but now found irritating. Emma nodded along, but her mind was focused elsewhere. Her gaze was fixed on Laura's face, watching for any sign of weakness, any sign that she was hiding something. But Laura seemed oblivious, lost in her own world. Finally, Emma decided it was time. She had to bring it up. There was no more avoiding it. She needed to strike while the iron was hot. "Laura," Emma said, her voice quieter now, more serious. "There's something I need to talk to you about." Laura looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly in confusion. She set her cup down, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Emma hesitated for the briefest moment, feeling the weight of the moment. But then the decision was made. She couldn't back out now. This was what she had been building toward. She had the power in her hands. She was going to take it. "I know about the affair," Emma said, her words blunt, almost cold. For a moment there was silence. Laura's face froze, her expression shifting from casual to a mixture of shock and disbelief. She leaned back in her chair, eyes widening slightly, as though she hadn't quite processed what Emma had just said. What are you talking about?" Laura stammered, her voice faltering. Emma didn't flinch. She had expected this reaction, and yet it still felt surreal. "I know. I've seen the messages. I know who he is, Laura." The words hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Laura's face turned pale, and for a moment, Emma thought she might collapse under the weight of the revelation. But Laura recovered quickly, a defensive look flashing across her face. "You've been snooping?" Laura's voice was sharp now, laced with anger. Emma kept her voice steady, refusing to show any signs of weakness. "No, I wasn't snooping, but I know what I saw." The two women locked eyes, and for a moment, it was as though time stopped. Emma could see the shock in Laura's eyes, but there was something else too, a flicker of fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. "What do you want?" Laura asked, her voice low, trembling. Emma leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to step down from your position. I want you to resign and let me take over. You've been hiding something, Laura. You've lied to everyone, and I think it's time for the truth to come out." Laura's face twisted with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Are you serious? You think you can just blackmail me like this?" Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground. "I'm not blackmailing you, Laura. I'm simply giving you a choice. You can either give up the promotion voluntarily, or I can make sure everyone knows about your affair. You'll lose everything." For a moment, there was silence again. Laura's hand clenched around her coffee cup, her knuckles white. She was struggling to keep her composure, but Emma could see the cracks forming. This was working. Emma had the power now, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. "I can't believe you're doing this," Laura said, her voice shaking now, but not with fear. There was anger in her tone, a palpable sense of betrayal. "I thought we were friends, Emma." Emma didn't waver. She couldn't. "We were friends. But I've always been in your shadow, haven't I? And now I'm finally taking what I deserve." Laura's face contorted with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You'll regret this. You have no idea what you're doing." Emma felt a cold shiver run through her, but she didn't back down. "Not now. Not when she was so close. It's already done. You don't have a choice." As the conversation continued, Emma realized just how far she was willing to go. She had entered into an unfamiliar situation, one that demanded ruthlessness, one where she had to rely on her ability to manipulate and control. This was no longer a simple matter of ambition. It was about power. And Emma was determined to take it. The moment after Emma made her demand hung in the air between them like a thick, suffocating fog. Laura's face was contorted in disbelief, but there was something else there too. Fear, anger, and perhaps just a hint of betrayal. Emma watched her carefully, studying her reaction as though it were a puzzle she was trying to solve. She had expected resistance, even fury, but what she hadn't expected was how deeply it would affect her. For the first time since she had set her plan in motion, Emma felt a flicker of doubt. "Emma," Laura said, her voice tight with anger, "you really think this is going to work? You think you can just blackmail me and get away with it?" Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had the power now. She could see it in Laura's eyes. Fear, desperation, the realization that she was trapped. And yet, part of her began to waver. Was this really the person she had been? Was this really who she had become? No, she told herself. She couldn't let herself feel guilty now. She had worked for this. She had earned the right to take this position, to take control of her life. If she allowed Laura to continue walking all over her, if she allowed her to keep everything that Emma had worked so hard for, then she would never be anything more than the supporting player, the one who was always second best. This was her chance, the only chance she might ever get. "I'm not going to back down, Laura," Emma said, her voice cold, steady. "This is happening whether you like it or not." But inside, she wasn't so sure. The words felt sharp in her mouth, too sharp, like a blade that cut both ways. She could see the emotional damage she was inflicting, the way her friend was crumbling under the weight of her own choices. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. It was supposed to be empowering, liberating, the beginning of Emma's rise to the top. And yet, there was a strange emptiness creeping in, a gnawing sensation that told her she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Laura's silence was more powerful than any words she could have spoken. She looked at Emma like she had never seen her before, her eyes full of confusion and pain. For the first time, Emma felt as if she were looking at a stranger, not a friend. Laura had always been so full of life, so vibrant and unshakable. Now, Emma saw her as something different, vulnerable, broken, and desperate. "You're really going to do this?" Laura asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to destroy everything?" The question hung in the air, and Emma had no answer. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to justify her actions, to explain how it had all led to this moment. She wanted to say that she had no other choice, that this was the only way to finally take control of her life. But deep down, Emma knew that wasn't the truth. She wasn't doing this because she had to. She was doing it because she was angry, bitter, and resentful of the way Laura had always had everything handed to her. The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Laura's face had gone pale, her lips trembling slightly as though she was struggling to hold herself together. Emma could feel the tension in the room, the weight of what was happening settling heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a promotion anymore. This was about everything, about years of simmering jealousy, about the way Emma had always felt overlooked, about the power dynamics that had shaped their friendship from the very beginning. But now that she had confronted Laura, Emma had to adapt. She had made her demand, and she could see that Laura wasn't going to give up easily. She wasn't going to just accept Emma's terms. Laura wasn't going to relinquish the promotion without a fight. Emma had known that from the start, but now that it was happening, she realized just how much harder this would be than she had anticipated. Laura finally spoke again, her voice steady, though there was an underlying tremor to it. "I'm not going to step down. You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not going to lose everything for you." Emma felt a surge of frustration. This was supposed to be easy. Laura was supposed to cave, to crumble under the pressure, but instead, she was fighting back. And for the first time, Emma realized just how much she underestimated Laura's resolve. "You don't have a choice," Emma said, her voice cold. But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. "If you don't step down, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been hiding. You'll lose everything, your job, your reputation, your life. Laura's gaze flickered with anger, but there was something else in her eyes now. Resignation. Emma could see that her friend was torn between her pride and her fear, and in that moment, Emma understood something else. Laura wasn't just trying to protect her job or her career. She was trying to protect herself from the person she had thought was her friend, the person she had trusted most. Emma had become the enemy, and that realization hit her like a physical blow. Emma didn't want to hurt Laura. She had never wanted this, but as the words came out of her mouth, as she continued to push and push, she realized she was no longer the person she thought she was. She was no longer the loyal friend, the one who had always been there for Laura. She had become someone else, someone manipulative, vengeful, and willing to sacrifice everything for power. For the first time in her life, Emma was standing on the other side of the line. She was the one who had crossed it, and there was no going back. Days passed in a blur after that confrontation. Emma had expected a quick resolution. She had imagined that Laura would quickly give in, resign from the promotion, and allow Emma to take the reins. But it didn't happen that way. Laura fought back in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. She began to subtly undermine Emma at work, telling colleagues about the difficult situation she was in without naming names. She played the victim, painting herself as the one who was under attack. The plan was backfiring, and Emma could feel it. At first, Emma didn't know how to respond. She had expected Laura to cower, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, she found herself facing a woman who was just as determined to protect her position as Emma was to take it. Laura wasn't going down without a fight, and the more Emma pushed, the more the situation escalated. Laura wasn't afraid to fight dirty, and Emma was starting to see just how far Laura was willing to go to maintain her power. Emma realized she was trapped in a vicious cycle. Every time she made a move to manipulate Laura, to force her into submission, Laura responded with equal force. The power struggle was becoming more and more intense, and Emma felt herself spiraling deeper into a world she didn't fully understand. She had entered unfamiliar territory, and every choice she made seemed to lead her further down a path she wasn't sure she could escape. The guilt she had initially tried to ignore began to weigh more heavily on her conscience. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It wasn't just about the success she so desperately wanted. Emma realized that she was losing something far more important than her chance at a higher position. She was losing her integrity, her humanity, and her friendship with Laura. And for the first time, she wondered if it was all worth it. Yet, despite the growing sense of unease inside her, Emma couldn't stop. She was too deep into it now. She had come too far. She couldn't back down, but she could feel the shift inside her. She could feel herself changing, becoming someone she didn't recognize. The person she had been, the one who had been kind, loyal, and hopeful, was slipping away, replaced by someone new. Someone harder, colder, and more willing to sacrifice anything to win. As the days wore on, the confrontation between Emma and Laura escalated. What had once been a quiet rivalry, a simmering jealousy, had turned into a full-blown war. Emma had thought she was prepared for this, but she hadn't anticipated the toll it would take on her. She hadn't realized how deeply it would wound her, how much it would change the way she saw herself. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered, "Is this really what you want?" But Emma refused to listen. She had come too far to turn back now. In the end, Emma got what she wanted. It happened quickly, almost like a weight lifted off her shoulders, but in the hours that followed, the air seemed heavier than it had ever been. Laura had stepped down, reluctantly, defeated by the immense pressure Emma had placed on her. It had all unfolded precisely as Emma had planned. She had cornered Laura, forced her into a position where there was no escape but surrender. And now, Emma stood victorious. But the victory tasted bitter, like ash in her mouth. The day that Laura resigned was a strange one. Emma had expected to feel elated, triumphant even. After all, she had spent weeks planning, manipulating, and carefully orchestrating every move. She had seen Laura falter, seen her crumble under the weight of the threat Emma had placed upon her. Laura had fought back, of course she always did. But in the end, Emma had won. Laura had been forced to admit defeat. It was in a small conference room that Laura handed over her resignation letter. Emma had made sure they were alone, as she didn't want any witnesses to the quiet intensity of the moment. The room was almost empty, save for a few chairs and a table stacked with papers that neither of them paid attention to. Laura sat there, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She looked tired, broken, defeated. Emma couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in her former friend. Laura was a shell of the confident woman she once knew. Her spirit had been crushed, her resolve shattered. And for a brief moment, Emma felt a pang of guilt, something that she quickly pushed away. She had done what she had to do. This was business. This was survival. "You've made the right choice," Emma said, her voice softer than she intended. It was meant to sound reassuring, confident even, but it came out brittle, almost mocking. She tried to push the guilt from her mind and focus on the task at hand. Laura didn't respond immediately. She simply pushed the resignation letter across the table toward Emma, as though it were some kind of final offering. She sat back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze averted. Emma took the letter, glanced at it for a moment, just enough time to confirm that the words were what she had expected. The resignation was clear, unequivocal. Laura was stepping down, relinquishing the position Emma had wanted for so long. The air in the room was thick with tension. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her pulse quickening as the weight of the moment began to sink in. She had won. Laura was no longer in control. Emma was the one who would take over, the one who would finally sit at the top of the ladder she had been climbing for so long. But the rush of triumph she had expected didn't come. Instead, an unsettling emptiness filled the space between them. Emma stared at the resignation letter, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper as though it might somehow come to life. She had worked for this moment, had sacrificed so much to get here, but now that she had it, it didn't feel the way she thought it would. "You'll regret this," Laura said quietly, her voice barely audible but carrying a weight that Emma couldn't ignore. She looked up at Emma then, her eyes dark and full of something Emma couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity? Anger? Or something deeper, something Emma wasn't ready to confront? "I don't think I will," Emma said, her voice firm, though the words felt hollow. She didn't want to admit that Laura's words had struck a nerve, that they had unsettled her more than she cared to acknowledge. Laura let out a long, shaky breath. She stood slowly, as though the effort required to do so was beyond her. "You've won, Emma. Congratulations. But you'll see. This won't be what you thought it would be." Emma watched her go, but something about the way Laura left, her shoulders hunched, her movements slow and deliberate, stirred something inside of Emma. She had gotten the promotion, yes. She had gotten what she wanted. But at what cost? The victory felt cold, devoid of the warmth she had imagined it would bring. There was no celebration, no sense of accomplishment, only the lingering echo of Laura's final words. "You'll see." As the days passed, Emma found herself sitting in the chair Laura had once occupied, the weight of the position settling heavily upon her. At first, it was exhilarating. She had the office, the corner desk with the panoramic view of the city, the title she had worked so long for. The power was intoxicating. She was in control now, no longer the overlooked, the underappreciated. People smiled at her with admiration and respect, calling her boss for the first time, and she felt that rush again, that heady feeling of authority. She had worked for this. She had taken it from Laura, and now, she was finally in charge. But as the days turned into weeks, Emma began to notice the cracks in the facade. The people who had once been her colleagues now looked at her with a different expression, some with envy, others with wariness. They didn't seem as eager to be her ally as they had been when Laura was still in charge. Emma's relationship with the team had shifted in subtle, yet profound ways. She was now the one making the decisions, the one people had to answer to, and the dynamic that had once been so comfortable, so familiar, was now irrevocably altered. What struck Emma most, however, was the loneliness. She had expected to feel a sense of pride, of satisfaction, but instead, she found herself isolated. The colleagues who had once spoken to her casually now treated her with distance. No one called to ask her about their personal lives. No one offered her the kind of camaraderie she had once shared with Laura. She had taken the seat at the top, but there was no one there to share it with her. The friendships she had once cherished, the connections she had once built, seemed distant, frayed at the edges. The emptiness of the position gnawed at her. She had reached the pinnacle of her career, the top of the mountain, but from up here, the view wasn't what she had imagined. The feeling of power was fleeting, and the responsibility, the weight of it, seemed to be growing heavier by the day. She found herself second-guessing every decision, questioning whether she had done the right thing. Laura's absence loomed large in the office, like a shadow she couldn't shake off. People still talked about Laura, about her successes, and the way she had been such an integral part of the company. Emma realized that the position she had fought so hard for was never truly hers. It was Laura's. It had always been Laura's. And now, Emma was just the caretaker of something that didn't feel like hers at all. The realization hit Emma hard one night as she sat alone in her new office, the lights of the city twinkling outside her window. She had everything she had wanted, but she couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. What had she really gained? The promotion? The respect of her peers? The position of power? Yes. But she had lost more than that. She had lost herself, and she had lost the one person who had meant everything to her. Laura had been her best friend, her confidant, and now she was gone. In her pursuit of success, Emma had sacrificed the most important relationship in her life. She had torn apart the one connection that had meant more to her than anything else. And now that she had the promotion, now that she had achieved what she had fought so hard for, Emma realized that she didn't feel the sense of triumph she had expected. Instead, she felt hollow. She had gotten what she wanted, but it wasn't what she needed. The phone call came early in the morning, breaking the silence that had become Emma's constant companion in her new role. She had expected it. She knew it was only a matter of time before something, or someone, would force her to confront the wreckage of what she had done. But even with that knowledge, the moment still took her breath away. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but cold. It belonged to a detective from the police department. "Miss Thompson, we need to speak with you about an incident involving Ms. Laura Bennett. I'm afraid it's serious. Can you come in for questioning?" For a moment, Emma couldn't process what she was hearing. Laura was gone from the company, out of Emma's life, and she hadn't heard from her in weeks. The guilt had lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over her, but Emma had convinced herself that she had done what was necessary. She had taken the promotion, earned it even, and now life was moving forward. The promotion had been hers. She had no time for regrets. But now, standing in her office, phone pressed to her ear, Emma realized with a sickening clarity that the consequences of her actions were not done haunting her. They had only just begun. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. "What happened to Laura?" "There's been an accident," the detective said, his voice flat. "We need your statement about your interactions with Ms. Bennett in the weeks leading up to her resignation." Emma felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She had seen Laura just a few weeks ago. In that small, sterile conference room, she had watched Laura sign her resignation letter, forced into submission under the weight of Emma's threats. Now, to hear that something had happened to her, something that was serious enough for the police to get involved, it made Emma's stomach turn. "What do you mean by accident?" Emma asked, her voice strained. The detective hesitated. "I'm afraid Ms. Bennett is dead, Miss Thompson." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Dead. Laura was dead. The room around her seemed to spin, her mind racing, unable to fully grasp the enormity of what she had just heard. She felt a sudden coldness seep into her bones. This couldn't be happening. It was too much. Too sudden. Too real. I'm sorry," Emma stammered, her heart pounding in her ears. "How did this happen? What happened to her?" There was a pause, and then the detective spoke again, his voice devoid of any emotion. "She was found unconscious in her apartment. It appears that she suffered a serious head injury, possibly from a fall. We're investigating the circumstances surrounding it. We'd like to ask you about the nature of your relationship with Ms. Bennett in the time before her death. If you could come down to the station, we can discuss it further." Of course. I'll be there," Emma said, her voice barely audible. She hung up the phone, but the conversation played in her mind on a loop. Laura was dead, and Emma had played a part in it. She had made sure Laura had stepped down, that she had been broken, humiliated, and stripped of everything that had once mattered to her. The guilt was suffocating, but it didn't stop there. It wasn't just guilt. It was a realization that had begun to sink in, a realization that Emma could not escape. She had done this. She had pushed her friend too far, manipulated her until she had no other option but to give in. And in the end, Laura's death, whether it was an accident or not, was on Emma's hands. The drive to the police station was a blur. Emma's thoughts were fragmented, her body tense with dread. She couldn't stop thinking about Laura's final moments, the pain she must have felt, the isolation. Emma had been the one to drive her there, to make her feel like she had nothing left. And now, with Laura gone, Emma realized the true cost of her ambition. The promotion, the power, the respect. None of it could bring back the one person who had once meant everything to her. None of it could undo the damage she had done. When she arrived at the police station, Emma was led into a small interrogation room. It was stark and uncomfortable, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The detective, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a tired expression, sat across from her, his eyes watching her closely. There was no sympathy in his gaze, only cold professionalism. "Miss Thompson," he began, flipping through a file, "we've reviewed your interactions with Ms. Bennett in the weeks leading up to her resignation. There seems to have been some tension between the two of you, to put it mildly. Can you tell me what happened during that time?" Emma swallowed hard. The words stuck in her throat, but she forced herself to speak. We had a professional relationship. We were friends once, but things became strained after she was promoted. I wanted that position, and well, I suppose things got complicated." The detective nodded, making notes. "It's clear that there was some animosity between the two of you. You were aware that Ms. Bennett had a personal issue, correct? Something involving an extramarital affair?" Emma felt a sharp pang in her chest. Laura's secret affair had been the leverage Emma had used against her. The affair had been the key, the thing that Emma had threatened to expose to destroy Laura's reputation and force her to resign. It had been Emma's weapon. And now that Laura was dead, that weapon seemed somehow so hollow, so cruel. "I knew about it," Emma said quietly, avoiding the detective's gaze. I used that information to make her step down. I didn't want to, but..." The detective cut her off. "You didn't want to? Miss Thompson, we have evidence of threats made through text messages and emails. You pressured her into resigning, and now she's dead. I need you to understand the gravity of what we're discussing here." The weight of his words sank in like lead, crushing her. Emma tried to keep her composure, but she felt tears stinging her eyes. She had been so determined to get ahead, to prove herself, to show that she was worthy of the position that had eluded her for so long. But now, she was face to face with the consequence of her actions. The person she had once called a friend was gone, and Emma had been the one to push her into that corner. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, they had all led here. And now it was too late. I didn't mean for this to happen," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted this. I was so angry. I was so tired of being second. I wanted to be the one in control. I wanted to prove that I was worth something. I thought if I could just get the position, everything would be different. I thought it would make me happy." The detective studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his tone more serious. "Miss Thompson, your actions have consequences. Whether or not you intended for this to happen, it doesn't change what you've done. We're still investigating the details of what happened to Ms. Bennett, but we need you to be honest with us." Emma felt the weight of his words like a hammer. The guilt was suffocating, and no matter how much she tried to distance herself from it, the reality was clear. She had crossed a line. The power she had fought so hard for, the victory she had thought would bring her fulfillment, was nothing more than an illusion. And now it had cost her everything. The investigation continued, but the damage had already been done. In the following weeks, the media picked up on the story, and Emma's involvement became public knowledge. The company where she had worked for so many years began distancing itself from her. Colleagues who had once admired her now whispered behind her back. The respect she had fought so hard for had evaporated in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter that she had taken the promotion, or that she had risen to the top. The price she had paid was far greater than any title or recognition could ever be worth. Emma's world began to unravel. She was no longer the confident, ambitious woman who had once plotted to climb to the top. She was a pariah, a woman consumed by guilt and regret. Every day felt like an unbearable weight. She couldn't escape the images of Laura, couldn't shake the feeling that she had been the one who had pushed her friend over the edge. The heavy toll of her actions weighed on her every moment. It was clear now, her ambition had cost her the only thing that had truly mattered: her humanity, her connection to others, and the trust she had once shared with Laura. And no matter what happened next, Emma knew that she would never be the same again. Emma sat alone in her small apartment, staring blankly at the wall. It was late, and the night had settled into an eerie stillness that matched the emptiness she felt inside. The past few months had been a blur of legal battles, public scrutiny, and endless self-reflection. She had been forced to resign from her position, the very one she had fought so hard to attain. The company had distanced itself from her colleagues had abandoned her, and the media had fed on the details of her betrayal like vultures circling a carcass. She was no longer the ambitious woman who had sought power, nor was she the confident professional she had once been. All that was left was a hollow version of herself, a woman who had lost everything. She tried to go about her days in some semblance of normalcy. Her routine was now a series of mechanical motions: wake up, eat, work on the few freelance projects she had managed to secure, and sleep. The days blurred together in a haze, and even the smallest tasks felt like mountains to climb. Every time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back at her. The person who had manipulated, threatened, and destroyed a friendship for the sake of ambition. But no matter how hard she tried to move on, no matter how much she wished to forget the past, the memories of Laura lingered. The image of her once best friend, broken, defeated, and ultimately gone, haunted her every waking moment. The guilt gnawed at her, relentless and suffocating. Emma had never imagined that the price of her actions would be so steep. She had told herself that getting the promotion, achieving her goals, would bring her happiness. Instead, it had cost her her humanity, her integrity, and her peace of mind. One afternoon, as Emma was walking through the quiet streets of the city, she passed the old cafe where she and Laura had spent so many hours talking and laughing together. It was the same cafe they had visited when they were younger, a place full of memories. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the door as a few patrons sat at tables, engrossed in their own lives. Emma paused for a moment outside, her breath catching in her throat. The weight of the past seemed to pull at her, and she couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. How had they gotten to this point? How had she let her envy, her ambition, destroy the one relationship that had mattered most? The door to the cafe opened, and a young woman stepped out, her arms loaded with bags. She smiled politely at Emma, but the smile faded when she recognized the sorrow in Emma's eyes. The woman, one of the cafe's regulars, had been a friend of Laura's. Emma remembered her well from the days when she and Laura used to meet there. She had been friendly, chatty, always making small talk while Laura sipped her cappuccino and Emma scrolled through emails on her phone. But now, the young woman's expression was one of quiet sympathy, and Emma could feel the weight of unspoken judgment in the air. "Are you okay?" the woman asked softly, her voice tinged with a gentleness that made Emma want to break down. "I haven't seen you around much lately." Emma tried to force a smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Just busy," she replied, her voice hoarse. The woman nodded, but her eyes lingered on Emma with a kind of knowing that made Emma uncomfortable. She had heard the rumors, everyone had. The truth about Emma's role in Laura's downfall had become public knowledge, and there was no escaping the whispers, the stares, the judgment. Emma had been vilified, portrayed as the villain in a tragedy that was now being played out on a public stage. There was no escaping the consequences of her actions, no way to undo the damage. "I'm sorry," the woman said quietly, her voice soft with sorrow. I just wanted to say that I hope you're doing better. I heard about Laura. It's really sad." Emma's throat tightened. She had spent so much time trying to convince herself that Laura's death wasn't her fault, that she had simply pushed her too hard, that it wasn't intentional. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had driven Laura to the brink, manipulated her into a corner, and then, when Laura had no choice but to submit, she had claimed the promotion she had always wanted. But in the process, she had lost something much more valuable than any job title. She had lost herself. She had lost Laura. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice shaking as the words caught in her throat. The woman nodded sympathetically, then turned and walked away. Emma watched her go, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Later that evening, as Emma sat alone in her apartment, she found herself thinking about all the things she had lost. She had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder, so determined to prove her worth to herself and others, that she had failed to see the bigger picture. She had taken everything for granted, her friendship with Laura, the support system she had once had, and even her own sense of self. She had let jealousy, resentment, and ambition cloud her judgment, and now, the cost was more than she could bear. But there was something else, something that had been simmering beneath the surface of her mind ever since the police had contacted her. The truth she had been avoiding, the uncomfortable reality that she had tried to suppress, was beginning to surface. Emma had always prided herself on being a woman of action, a woman who took control of her life. But in the end, she had learned the hardest lesson of all. Control was an illusion. She had tried to control Laura's fate, thinking that if she could manipulate her friend, if she could force her to step down, everything would be as she had imagined. She had told herself that success, power, and recognition would make her happy. But happiness had eluded her, just as it had always done. And now, sitting in her small apartment, with the faint sounds of the city drifting through the window, Emma knew the truth. True happiness could never come from control. It came from love, from connection, from understanding that some things, some relationships, could never be manipulated or forced into submission. Emma had lost that lesson. She had lost Laura. And now, all that was left was the painful, raw truth that no promotion, no title, no amount of success could ever bring back what she had lost. The next morning, Emma woke up early, as she had done for years. She had been an early riser for as long as she could remember, always the first to arrive at work, always the first to take charge. But today was different. Today, she had no desire to rush. Today, there was nothing to prove. The frantic pace of her old life no longer held any appeal. Emma knew that it was time to let go of the person she had been, the ambitious, driven woman who had sacrificed everything for success, and face the truth of who she had become. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, staring at her reflection. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger. The face was familiar, but the eyes, those eyes that had once been filled with ambition and confidence, were now dull, haunted by the ghosts of her past mistakes. The guilt, the regret, the sense of loss, it all hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emma knew that she could never undo what had happened. The damage had been done, but there was one thing she could do. She could learn from her mistakes. She could try to rebuild the pieces of herself that had been shattered. It would be a long, difficult journey, one that would take time and humility. But it was the only path left for her. The woman she had been was gone, and in her place stood a woman who had lost everything but had learned a hard truth. The price of ambition was too steep, and the true value of life lay not in power or success, but in the relationships we build and the love we give and receive. In the weeks that followed, Emma sought therapy, reaching out for help in ways she never had before. She began to piece together a new life for herself, one that was no longer centered on the pursuit of success, but on healing, self-forgiveness, and growth. It was slow and painful work, but for the first time in months, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't the woman she had been, but perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. Emma would never forget what had happened, nor would she ever fully forgive herself for the role she had played in Laura's tragic end. But she understood now that redemption wasn't about undoing the past. It was about living in the present, learning from the mistakes that had led her to this point, and striving to be a better version of herself every day. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that office all those months ago, hungry for power and success. She was a woman who had lost everything and, in the process, had found the only thing that truly mattered: love, connection, forgiveness.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.